Excellent. So we'll value everyone's time and get started. So welcome to tonight's weekly BFree Zoom. My name's Laura and that's Vivian, and I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our good mate Tully on to share a bit of information with us tonight. So for those that have just jumped on, make sure you grab yourself a pen and a paper because he'll be dropping a lot of knowledge bombs. So you'll be frantically scribbling away. So grab that now before he gets started. So Tully, to introduce Tully, he originally started his career as a physiotherapist and about 4 years ago started exploring kind of the realm of personal development and looked at things like mindset, goal setting, and kind of exploring all different avenues of that. So I'm just actually... So exploring, so behaviour change, personal development, emotional intelligence, tantra, mindfulness, all these crazy, awesome different things, and got quite into all of that. So he now works as a speaker and an embodiment coach, and just helps people live happier, healthier, funner lives. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce him tonight, and we're so lucky to have him sharing on the subject of self-sabotage and breaking that vicious cycle that I know myself and so many other people struggle with. So I'm not going to take up any more time because I want to start hearing from him straight away. So Tully, are you there on the line?
I am here. I'm incognito. My video's not working, but I'm here. I'm ready to go.
I will hand it over to you now. So I'll just mute myself.
Awesome. Thanks so much for welcoming me on, Laura. And thanks for being here, everybody. So we've got a few of the regular crew, which is awesome to see, and a couple of newbies as well. First of all, apologies for my video not working. I did a Zoom call yesterday and it was working, and then all of a sudden it's not. So I'm not sure what's going on there. But that's okay because I've got some slides set up to bring a bit of structure to tonight's call. So you wouldn't have been looking at my face very much anyway. So I'm just going to share my screen and get that up for us, and then we'll kick in to it. So here we go. So, and I can still see your faces, which is good. So give me a thumbs up if you can see that PowerPoint. Yeah, awesome. And then there we go. All right, so we'll rip into it. So yeah, thanks for being here, guys. I'm really excited about tonight's call. This is something that I've gone through a lot myself, and I know a lot of people have. And when I threw it out on Facebook and got about 50 million messages yesterday, it's obviously something that's common and something that's very human, but I think it's something that doesn't have to impact our lives as much as it does. And so the topic for tonight is obviously breaking the cycle of self-sabotage. And the second part of it was so we can smash our body and business goals, but this stuff will flow onto any and every area of life. So as you're going through and you're taking notes and you're hearing this stuff, think about how you can apply it to all areas of life, whatever's most relevant for you. So I'll get into it. So Laura gave me a bit of an intro. So yeah, basically started out my career as a physio about 7 years ago. About 4 years ago, came across the epic profession of network marketing, and that led me to explore personal development. And that sent me off on a big journey of exploring all kinds of stuff like Laura mentioned. But basically what I was always curious about why some people achieved success in something and why other people didn't. Like what was happening for that group of people that didn't quite make it or made it and then dropped back. And so I've spent the last 4 years delving into that and have learned some stuff along the way, implemented it in my own life and felt the transformations, but I've also worked one-on-one with people and as a speaker, so in a workshop space. So this isn't stuff I've just read in a book. It's stuff I use myself every day and I've helped other people use. So hopefully you guys can take some value from it too. So I guess let's just start with why we set goals in the first place. So really, at the end of the day, we set a goal because we want to feel a certain way, whether it's to lose 5 kilos, whether it's to earn an extra $500 residual every week, whether it's to achieve a certain rank in a business or to start a certain creative project. Whatever the goal is, what we're actually wanting is to feel a certain way as a result of achieving that goal. And when you can start to recognize that, you can start to get a bit more specific with the goals that you're setting, because the fastest way to sabotage your success is to set goals that aren't actually yours. So hang on one second. So it's to set goals that aren't actually yours. And just show of hands, who's set a goal that they didn't really, when they sat with it, didn't really give a shit about? Can I just get a show of hands? Anybody? Yeah. And because we're living in this hyper-connected, hyper-stimulated world where we're fed information on who we should be and what we should do from all angles from a really young age. And it's very easy to lose a sense of connection with who we are and what we actually want. So the first thing you to do before setting any goals is actually get clear with, is this actually a goal for me? And I've got at the bottom that alignment is key. Listen to your body, because you'll know. There'll be a feeling if you set a goal, or you think about a goal that you've got, whether it's lose 5 kilos in the next 30 days or double your income in the next year or whatever it is. If you sit with that goal and think about that goal and it feels a bit heavy in your stomach, or it doesn't feel light, then chances are it's not your goal. But even a goal that is stretching you, if it's actually in alignment, it'll still feel light and exciting. You might feel a bit nervous about it, but you'll still feel excited by the thought of pursuing it. So what's involved in achieving a goal? So essentially, like, our current success in any area of life is a result of consistent actions in that area. So our behaviors. So our behaviors in our relationship determine the quality of our relationship. Our behaviors to do with our health determines the quality of our health. So pretty straightforward, but I think before we get into the nitty-gritty of change, let's just get clear with what we're actually working with. Because to achieve a new goal, essentially then all we need to do is change one or more of those behavior patterns. So when we're looking at goal setting and achievement, actually what we're looking at is behavior change. And there's comments popping up. I can't see the comments anymore, so if you have anything that needs addressing, just we'll do some Q&A at the end as well. So essentially, we're dealing with behavior change. So it might look like we're dealing with goal setting, but actually we're dealing with changing behavior patterns. So we can't live a different life remaining the same person. So when we set a big goal, whether it's to, like we say, whatever the goal is, if you were currently the person who could achieve that goal or who could live in that space, you would already be there. So if you were actually...
Sorry, Tully, I don't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to, I don't know if you can see, but Jules, can you hear me? Could you just tap the screen and press mute, please, honey? There's lots of wind coming through.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, honey.
Yeah, so just mute your line as you come on. Thanks, Rhea. So we can't, if we were already that person who was earning $1,000 a week residual income, then we'd already be earning it. So the fact that we're not where we want to be means that we haven't developed the skills and we aren't the person that would actually achieve those things. So who do we need to be to actually achieve, who do we need to be so we actually achieve these goals at an unconscious level? So how do we change our behavior? Two main ways of going about it. So the first is change our story. So what I mean by story is change our unconscious beliefs about ourselves. So we will live into the story that we believe about ourselves. And everyone right now has an unconscious story. Even if you've done a lot of personal development, you'll have an unconscious story that's running about yourself in certain areas, or about health. You'll have an unconscious story about weight loss. You might believe that weight loss is hard and not maintainable. You might believe that you need to work hard to make money. And if that's an unconscious belief, you won't actually do what's required to develop a healthy residual income. So getting clear with the story is something that we're going to touch on tonight. And also changing our state, so our physiology. Both are important, and long-term change really requires both. And I think, and I'll touch on it when I go through changing our state at the end, but the simplicity of some of this stuff around changing our state can often get overlooked because it is relatively simple. And we often look for complex things to keep ourselves where we are, when really there is some very, very simple things that we can do, if done consistently, that will create powerful change. So the first one, looking at our story and looking at behavior change and creating change, is just touching on this analogy. So just throw something in the chat box if you've either read the book Switch or you've heard of this analogy. The elephant, the rider, and the path. So this is a bit of a metaphor for change, and the chat box is lighting up. Nice, so I can get that up there, but that's probably blocking the view for everyone else, so I won't. This is a metaphor for change. So when we're looking to create change, we've got the rider. So the rider represents our conscious thought, that 5% of our brain's operating power that we're aware of, our thoughts. It's the logical side of our being, so the side that uses rationale and plans and does all those sorts of things. That's the rider. The elephant is our subconscious or our emotional body. So that is that other 95% of our operating power, and it's also our emotional body. So which one of those two do we think, if our logical brain is like, yep, I want to earn $1,000 a week, passive income, but our emotional brain or our unconscious story is that we're not worthy of that kind of money. You need to work hard to make money. Money doesn't grow on trees. If our unconscious patterning is telling us that, who do you think would win in a tussle between the little guy on top and the elephant? Probs the elephant. And so creating change requires the alignment of both. That direction with our conscious thought and a clear goal, and I'm sure you've all heard that before, clarity around the goal that you're working towards, super important. But having the elephant on board is super important, and it's often missed. And you can create short-term change without really having the elephant on board. If you've got a really good program, or you can sort of, if you create change quickly, you can, and I'm sure you've all experienced, you've broken through and you've lost the weight, and then you might put a little bit back on, or you've made gains in your business, and then for whatever reason, life happens, in quotation marks, and then things drop back to where they are. So, because if we're changing our state and directing the rider, but the elephant isn't on board and our unconscious beliefs aren't changing to match up with this new version of ourselves, then we'll drop back to where we are. Because like I said before, we will live into the story we believe about ourselves. So unless that changes, we'll find a way to end up back where we started. And then obviously shape the path. So the path, I guess, represents more the action plan. And that is super important, because if you're directing the rider and you're like, wicked, I'm going to lose 10 kilos, and you're motivated and you believe you can, but the path and the course of action you take is eat 5 cheeseburgers every day, then you're probably still not going to get there. So having a simple path, so a simple system to follow, is just as important as the other two, because you can be in alignment and taking action, but just doing something that just won't work, and you're still not going to get there. So all those 3 factors need to be there to create that lasting change. So just touching a little bit on the cycle of behavior. So I'm sure a few of you have seen this before, but this is basically how things work in terms of behavior. So our thoughts lead to feelings. So, and this is extremely well documented. Us thinking certain thoughts can cause physiological changes in our body, so we feel certain feelings. Based on those, and think of that as the rider up the top. You can short-term change the feelings. Based on those feelings, we'll take action or develop a behavior pattern, which is a series of consistent actions. Those actions will lead to a result, and the behaviors will lead to an experience. That experience will result in a feeling. So that feeling is actually how we remember things. So our brain remembers things based on the intensity of the emotion we feel at the time of whatever's happening. So whether that's a life experience, whether that's learning something, if you're learning something, who remembers those, or went to uni or even school when you sat in a lecture and it was just boring as all hell and you just don't remember a freaking thing? Yeah. Who had like a really funny or charismatic lecturer or teacher at some point, so you were actually feeling something while you were learning, and the information actually gets anchored in. So the magnitude of that feeling will determine how, I guess, deeply that experience is anchored in. Now, the slightly annoying thing though is our brain is actually wired to anchor in negatively perceived experiences more strongly than positively perceived experiences. And that's a safety mechanism. That's like our amygdala, the little back part of our brain, that primitive part of our brain. Anything that could potentially harm or hurt us, we anchor in really strongly, even if it's just a perceived harm or hurt. So we might have something happen to us when we're young. We might put up our hand to share something in class and we get mocked or something happens, and that one negative experience can result in the thoughts as you go back up to the top that I'm not good enough, it's not worth me sharing my message or whatever, and then that will contribute to your overall sense of self-worth. And so this is constantly playing out, right? So if this is how behavior works and we want to achieve a new goal to get to a new state, to have a new result and experience and feel new feelings on a consistent basis, we need to look at all of these things, especially our thoughts. So our thoughts can kick off the whole thing. Before we touch on that though, there's one more piece to the puzzle that's extremely important, and that's our environment. Because nothing will influence our thoughts more than our environment. Our environment growing up, and we're going to touch on that in a second, that influenced our thoughts, which then became our unconscious behavior patterns, our current environment. And that's why success, and we see it all the time, that's why I'm sure people have tried to lose weight before, but then when you get dropped in a positive, supportive environment like the Be Well community, your chances of success when your environment is conducive to the change that you're trying to make is huge. And staying plugged into that on a consistent basis is really, really, really important. So whether it's goals in your business or goals with your health, if you want to be healthy, spend time around healthy people. If you want to be wealthy, spend time around wealthy people. And it sort of goes without saying, but I see the biggest reason I see a lot of people try and fail at things is because there are either people in their life or environments in their life that they're not willing to cut out, and yet they're still wanting to make changes when that environment doesn't support it. And it might be possible short term, but I have not seen it yet once that somebody can create lasting change in an environment that doesn't support it and actually maintain that. So before we look at anything else, being ruthless with the environment that you put yourself in, it kind of takes care of the rest, to be honest, because you'll start having conversations and you'll start thinking new thoughts and feeling new feelings automatically if your environment changes. So that's my first, I guess, and then biggest suggestion is really get honest with yourself about that. Like if you're at a stage in your life where you want to create something, spend more time talking to and being around people that are creating. If you're working really hard and going for a goal, team up with and connect with people regularly that are doing the same thing. Same goes for weight loss and everything. The kicker is that this bottom bit, this bottom feeling, we're actually already conditioned to be familiar with and are actually addicted to a certain set of emotions right now. So the question I want you to ask yourself and to start jotting in your notes is, when you're self-sabotaging, what feelings do you find yourself feeling often? So it might be guilty, it might be disappointed, it might be sad, it might be not good enough, it might be whatever it is. Just check in with what you, and then the thoughts and the head talk that go along with that. Get really clear with that. And now we've only got a couple of seconds to do it now because we'll move on, but come back to it and get really clear with that. Because when we're actually, the reason we're self-sabotaging is because we are familiar with a certain set of feelings, and anything other than that is perceived as different and therefore a threat by our unconscious primitive brain. So even though, you know, losing 10 kilos might feel really good and be really healthy for us, if it's different to those unconscious feelings that we're addicted to, then there'll be resistance to going there. And this is super powerful. This addiction keeps people in abusive relationships. This addiction keeps people 50 kilos overweight to the point where it kills them. Like, this is really powerful. And this is when you're dealing with change, big or small, this is what we're dealing with. So awareness precedes change. So before you can actually change anything, you need to be really, really clear with what's going on. Have an understanding of this, be very clear with the feelings that you feel consistently, and just develop a bit of curiosity about it, because often when we're in those sort of slumps where we're self-sabotaging, often we can take it quite personally. It's like, oh, here I go again, or typical, like I always do this, or whatever your smack talk in your head is. It's often, it's not personal. Like, we are not our unconscious behavioral patterns. Do you know what I mean? It's like we require to change something. We require separation so we can become the observer of it and be really clear with how it's showing up. So I just want to quickly touch on where those come from, because again, the more awareness we have around it, the more we're able to actually change it with ease. So developing these unconscious patterns and addictions to emotion. So 0 to 7 years old, and this, I guess 1 hour isn't the scope to go into the sort of full neuroscience of our brain waves and the states that we're in. But basically, that first 7 years, we're very susceptible to new information. We don't have a filter. So what we see and experience, that's how we form our map of the world. And that's when our neurology is developing. And that's when we're starting to form these addictions to certain emotions. So if we feel, and again, this is another exercise. So write these questions down. So what events can you remember happening? And what meaning did you or do you still attribute to those events? And then the other one is, what feelings do you remember feeling a lot of? Because if your unconscious story and your physiology is that of somebody who is disappointed a lot, you're not going to be able to achieve your goals until you recognize that and can start to change it. Because when you actually, this awareness basically creates a bit of space. So when you're trying to create change in your business and you've got a list of things you need to do and you're finding a way to not do them, all that is your unconscious patterning trying to keep you where you are, or trying to get you to the point where you feel disappointed again. Same goes with health. When you go reaching for the cake or whatever, and you're justifying it in your head, knowing what you know now, you've got the awareness that you're like, this isn't actually me wanting the cake. This is my unconscious behavioral patterns trying to stay familiar with the feelings of disappointment, guilt, shame, whatever it is. And this can be really, really strong. So just, I can't really see the chat box. So just throw up an emoji in the chat box if this is all landing. just so because I'm kind of feel like I'm just talking. Yeah, emoji. Yeah, wicked. Cool. So, I went back. So this is really important to get clear on, and getting real for a second. Like if some pretty gnarly stuff happened when in those ages, 0 to 7, 7 to 14 especially, you can get imprinted with some pretty strong emotions. And the stats around physical abuse and all kinds of different emotional abuse and neglect and all those sorts of things is it's more common than we like to admit. So this is something to just check in with. If you've been trying especially if you've been trying for a long time to create changes and you find yourself ending up back in the same spot, it's an indication that you probably would want to go and have a look at this stuff and seek some outside help for dealing with this stuff, because unless that shifts, it's going to be really, really hard to create that lasting change. So releasing emotions, again, I wanted to touch on this because I feel like this is the biggest missed piece. And I know a few of the guys on the call went to Tony Robbins recently, and I know he's really big on state and emotion and actually feeling and embodying things. And all the people that are best at this kind of work in the world are. Because if we hold on to emotions from the past, it keeps us stuck there. So if something happens to us, we feel a certain feeling because we attribute a certain meaning to a certain event, and we've felt something, but our body didn't actually express and release it through breath, movement, and sound. Just think of how a little kid would feel and express emotion, usually throw a tanty or whatever. But if we don't actually feel and release those emotions as they're happening, we hold on to them. And then if we go back to that cycle of behavior change down here, we've got the more we've held on to emotion, the more that we've got strong anchors with feelings that our body wants to feel. Is that making sense? Nodding heads. Yeah, wicked. Big nodding from Laura. So releasing those emotions is super important. And that just requires breath, movement, and sound. And that's exactly how we change state, which we're going to touch on in a second as well. So there's a big difference between releasing emotions and indulging in emotions. So because an emotion, and they've done a lot of study on this as well, an emotion in its actual pure form doesn't last longer than 90 seconds. You can have a state that lasts longer than 90 seconds, but after 90 seconds, it's actually a thought-fueled feeling rather than an actual emotion. So just because I'm suggesting you release emotion doesn't mean it gives you an excuse to indulge and just be sad on the couch and crying for 50 days, because that's actually not going to get anyone anywhere. But what I saw a lot, and I still see, is people trying to positivity, personal development, spiritual kung fu their way out of feeling shit. And it just doesn't work. Like and I'm going to talk about changing state as well, because there's two sides to the coin. Like only doing one never works. So only just feeling all your emotions and trying to release everything until you're fully, in quotation marks, healed, and then you can go and start doing what you're supposed to be doing, that doesn't work. But pretending that stuff hasn't happened and completely ignoring the emotions doesn't work either. So it's finding the balance of both and finding ways that work for you to actually tap into that. And there's lots of ways of going about it. Again, that's probably a little bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about tonight. But that's just something to note, especially if on that last one, if you've had a lot of stuff happen, and it can happen after this, if you've had a really traumatic breakup or a really traumatic experience when you were 23, but you didn't actually process it, the same thing applies. So that's releasing emotions. So going back to how do we change our behavior, changing our story and our state, with an awareness of all of that, all that awareness is good for nothing if we're not willing to make new choices. So there is no magic pill. There's no anyone that's going to be able to fix you so that you somehow magically just do it. It takes work. And having more awareness around it just gives you more of an opportunity to, it creates space between yourself and that unconscious automatic sabotaging behavior. And when you've got that little bit of space, it gives you a chance to change your physiology and to make a new decision. If you're not willing to do that, nothing's ever going to change. So knowing all of this stuff isn't going to do anything unless you're willing to make those decisions. And by very definition, that's going to be uncomfortable because it's going to feel new. Even if it's putting you in a better spot, it's going to feel new and uncomfortable, and there'll be resistance to it. So the first thing, changing our state. Already touched on this one a bit, environment. Again, I can't stress it enough. Putting yourself in an environment that's supportive of the change you're trying to make is key. So if you're trying to lose weight and get healthy, go and find a group of people that are healthy or that has lost weight. And there's somebody's accidentally like highlighting the screen. I'm not sure how that's happening.
Sorry, that's me. I don't know how the heck I'm doing that.
That's all good.
I thought I was just highlighting it for myself. Sorry.
No, that's all right. No worries. At least I know you're engaged and taking lots of notes. That's good. So changing our state, environment, again, yeah, that's huge. Breath, movement, and sound. So this is the other biggest thing I've found. Most people are walking around in a stressed state, and the first thing we do when we're stressed is we stop breathing properly. So actually learning to diaphragmatically breathe or exploring different sorts of breath work, and it can be really simple. Breath work can sound a bit out there for people who haven't done it, but can be extremely simple, and there's no quicker way to change your physiology than through your breath and breathing properly. The other one is movement, obviously. That can change our state straight away. And then sound. This is a big one, and this is another one that I found wasn't spoken about as much in sort of the more mainstream personal development stuff that I did. Because and if you think about it, sound has a big impact on our physiology. If we hear music with a strong beat, straight away we start to move. There's music that can make us feel sad, or it can make us cry, or it can evoke emotion. There's music that can make us feel angry. It's like why the soundtrack of a movie is just as important as what's going on in the actual movie. The sound is really important. So to start incorporating more of that, if you're not already, start playing more music. So play music that you like, and if you game, sing, because us making sound changes our physiology on a whole nother level. And it's something that gets suppressed so much from such a young age. Like children should be seen and not heard. And it's just, there's so many things where we're told to sit down, be quiet and listen. Or we put our hand up to speak and we get mocked. And it just happens gradually over time. We sort of lose our voice. And then we're also taught not to express any emotions and make any sound with that. But there's no quicker way to change your physiology than combining breath, movement and sound. So having some sort of ritual, like if you're, again, going back to the topic, trying to change, break a cycle of self-sabotage, having a ritual where you're setting up your state every day is super important. And including all aspects of breath, movement and sound is going to make it more powerful. If you just moved yoga and weren't breathing, that'd still be okay. If you were just breathing properly, that would still be okay. But combining the three, and it's why you go to events like big events like Tony Robbins events and the like. When the music is pumping, you're screaming your lungs out, you're jumping up and down, and because you get so out of breath, you're breathing deeply. And that's why these things, you can actually go for 14 hours a day because you're maintaining a state. So there's no reason you can't do that. Maybe not as extremely, but you can't do that every day to put yourself in a state that's going to be more conducive to the changes that you're trying to make. The third one, nutrition. Nutrition is huge. Like anybody who's done, and if you're listening to this, you might have just started your 30-day cleanse, or you might have just finished. You will be feeling the benefits of A, the positive environment, B, the powerful effect nutrition can have, because essentially how our body develops the hormones that control most of our physiology only 5% of it can be done on its own. The rest requires the nutrition that we're putting into our body. So if you're trying to create change in any part of your life, whether it's business, relationships, whatever it is, if your nutrition isn't on point, you're going to be making things really flipping hard for yourself. So making sure you're looking at that and cleaning that up, inviting more play into your life. Yes.
Tully, are you able to mute everyone? There's a few new people that are just still off mute.
Let me see. Participants, manage participants, mute all. I think that's it. Sorry, guys.
Awesome. Yep, perfect. Thanks, Tal.
No worries. Cool. So the fourth point is invite more play into your life. Again, nothing will change your physiology. So a lot of this is actually just look at what children do and copy them. Breath, movement, sound, and play, and be in nature. But play is powerful because there are very few things that actually access and enhance the efficiency of both sides of your brain. Your left logical planning brain and your right creative brain. The studies that they've done on it is play, and what they define play as is doing something for the sake of doing it with no intended result. So that might be playing music, playing a game, whatever, and just bringing the feeling of play into things you're already doing, because that's actually going to enhance both sides of your brain and change your state at a really profound way. And then the last one is get into nature. Again, extremely well studied that if you're spending time in nature has a big impact on our physiology, especially if you're sabotaging. It's really easy to, and they've done this a lot, it's a lot of studies around depression, that an hour in nature with no cell phone or anything, 1 hour in nature a week is as impactful as antidepressants. Antidepressants don't really, the stats on them are very woeful anyway, but just to give an indication of changing state. Getting into nature is doing that. And again, with all of these, if we want to create lasting change and not sabotage, we need a ritual, something that happens daily or weekly. It needs to be ritualized. If you just do a one-off when you feel like it, when you need it, you often don't feel like it. So if you don't have a ritual around these things, then you're gonna struggle. You're gonna be up and down, and you're gonna be inconsistent. And then the last thing to touch on is changing our story. So going back to that unconscious mind chatter and those feelings that we often feel when we're sabotaging, just sit with this for a little while and figure out what kind of stories you've got around A, yourself in general, but B, the goals you're trying to achieve. So, and the two things that have really strong anchors are money and our self-worth, which health is a big part of that. So you need to develop a way, and I'm not going to give you a way because everybody does this differently, but repetition is key. So whether it's affirmations, whether you write a script for yourself, whether you record something and listen to it every day, but repeating this new story is key. And that's the only way our neurology can actually change, is repetition of this new story on a consistent basis, and then it can start to replace the old one. Other things like hypnosis and all of that can make it a bit more powerful. But if you're just repeating it often enough and combining it with all this other stuff and changing your state, then that will be enough to create some powerful change. And then just with your story, checking in with the power of language and get ruthless with the words that come out of your mouth and just the words that you tell yourself. So this can be when you're sabotaging and when you're not. And I think especially a big one is how you receive compliments as well. This just popped into my head. But often look at what language comes up for you when you start to make little gains in whatever goal you're pursuing. When you lose that first kilo, or you make that first extra $200 a week, or whatever it might be, just check in with the language that you use with the people around you and with yourself. Because that, again, that repetition is key. So if we might, for 10 minutes every morning, say these awesome affirmations, but if for the rest of the day you're talking smack about yourself in your own head, then you're going to struggle. So having those rituals in the morning is key, but checking in with the language that you're using throughout the day. Then have awareness of borrowed stories as well. Like, start to get really expansive with this, because it's all a story. Like, nobody was born with a behavioral pattern. Nobody was born with a belief. Nobody was born with, and the obvious ones are, like, if you look at things like racism or all these conditioned things and this hate, and like all of these things, because if we said out loud a lot of the things we say to ourselves in our head, sometimes it can look a lot like hate, especially if we're in one of these sabotaging cycles. It can look pretty hateful, and hate is learnt. Hate has been borrowed. So go back to where you might have borrowed it from, because when you can get more specific about that, it can be easier to let go of and more powerful. So have a look at where you borrowed those stories. Was it an event that happened to you, and the meaning, more importantly, the meaning you attributed to it? So just take the time to get really clear with the stories that you've got in these certain areas. And this is really important, because especially, like, if anybody on the call, they might have finished their first 30 days or might have done a 16-week challenge, and you've got epic results, you've lost 5 kilos, you're feeling great. But if you still have this borrowed shitty story about your health and your weight, you will find a way to revert back to being comfortable in that. So write them down, and then just reminding yourself of the power that you get to choose. So no matter what story's been handed to you, no matter what's happened to you and how you've perceived it and the meaning you've made of it, at the end of the day, you get to choose. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Often it's not. But if you do the things that are easy, life is often pretty hard. If you do the things that feel hard, life gets a lot easier. So just reminding yourself when things do get tough that you have that power to choose can be really important. So I'm going to wrap it up there, guys, but really just have fun with it. We can, when we're going for goals, we can get caught up in the seriousness of it, but really just bring some lightness to it, and go back to those questions that we went through, get really clear with that, and have it visual, have it up somewhere, so that when things do get tough, because when things are going well, it's all pretty easy and you just feel like a lord, you're in flow, you're just an absolute boss. And then all of a sudden, when you actually need all of this stuff, it goes out the window. So making sure that you've got access to it all on a regular basis is really important. And if you don't have an accountability buddy for what you're going after, then make sure you do that too. All right, I'm going to wrap it up there. I haven't been watching any of the chat, so I'm just going to unshare my screen. So awesome. Can you mute all? Mute. Awesome. All right, lots of telling me to mute people. Sweet. Well, I hope that landed for you guys. Again, it feels weird because I can look at you, but you guys can't see me. But thanks for taking the time to jump on. And if you've got any questions about any of the content that we went through, then feel free to hit us up. But other than that, enjoy the rest of your Monday night. I'm just going to stop recording.